Welcome to the lesson on divergent thinking for generating and to a lesser degree synthesizing ideas. In this lesson, we'll be talking about strategies to encourage divergent and lateral thinking in the classroom.
While we are situating divergent thinking within the idea generation phase of the critical and creative process, it can be quite effective for encouraging students to challenge assumptions, consider the types of questions they are asking, and even to evaluate their own metacognition. Some of the intellectual standards most aligned with synthesizing and generating ideas might be: is this idea relevant to the problem I've identified? Is my idea original? Will this idea make a significant contribution to solving a problem? Have I been flexible and adaptable in my thinking as new information presents itself? And is there a clear connection between this idea and the problem or argument? We can't talk about divergent thinking without also talking about convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is idea generating and occurs within a structure that is often spontaneous, free flowing, and nonlinear in manner. Convergent thinking is the ability to apply facts, rules, and materials from a variety of sources to bear on a problem in such a way as to produce the correct or best answer. Some create a false dichotomy between divergent thinking relating to the arts, humanities, and design, while convergent thinking applies to science and technology. We want to think about the relationship not of two separate dichotomies, but of a reciprocal process. And a process that should occur multiple times throughout a project, class, curriculum, and lifelong learning. Oftentimes, we also create divergent thinking with creativity, but it really is a part of the creative process, not a synonym for it. There is also a pervasive and problematic stereotype concerning who uses divergent versus convergent thinking methods. An important core of this program is to move beyond these stereotypes. This equation of divergent thinking associated solely with the arts and creativity also brings with it some of the biases associated with the messiness or lack of initial clarity that it can bring to a process, especially at the early stages. But at the same time, there are some very valid reasons why divergent thinking is often hard to integrate into classroom settings, including divergent thinking treats all initial ideas equally, regardless of context or ultimate applicability. Divergent thinking is often hard to measure because it is hidden in what students turn in as a final product for assessment. And this is why the reflections of work we've introduced earlier in this program are emphasized, because they allow you to see this hidden thinking as well as the risks that students took. And finally, divergent behavior in larger classrooms might cause disruption or even physical harm. Think about a chemistry lab. Therefore, we also expect our students to display good judgment or convergent thinking strategies so that they can make the best decisions. But the unintended consequences of this discouragement is that it also encourages students to seek out only one answer. It can also discourage intellectual risk-taking and innovation. In his TED Talk, How Schools Kill Creativity, Sir Ken Robinson argues that creativity in today's world is as important as literacy and that we should treat it with the same status. We don't grow into creativity, but we grow out of it, or rather are educated out of it. We talked earlier in this course about the difficulty of quantitatively measuring creativity. We use this study as an example of how specifically divergent thinking, or coming up with diverse ideas, changes over time. In 1968, George Land conducted a longitudinal research study to test the creativity of 1,600 children ranging in ages from 3 to 5 who were enrolled in a Head Start program. He retested them again at 10 years of age, and then again at 15 years of age. At 5 years old, 98% scored in the creative genius category. At 10 years old, 30% scored in the creative genius category. And at 15 years old, 12% scored in the creative genius category. Compared against the same test given to 280,000 adults, only 2% of those adults scored in the creative genius category. Land concluded that non-creative behavior is learned early on. So, how can we bring divergent thinking into our classroom in addition to the convergent thinking that might already be present? We can separate and give space to each type of thinking. We can encourage play and manage failure. We can encourage a diversity of perspectives, and we can acknowledge multiple approaches as valid. One of the problems with many educational models is that we ask students to do both types of thinking at the same time. So, as students are supposed to be brainstorming, they're also judging and criticizing and censoring simultaneously, which can prevent ideas from ever being externalized. This also sets up an unnecessary conflict between knowledge and imagination. Separating and giving space to both divergent and convergent thinking might include drawing on knowledge as well as imagination, embedding opportunities for safety and risk, or high and low stakes, including multiple viewpoints, including insiders and outsiders, or mixing methods and media. When failure is framed by reflection and iteration and less by penalty and closure, we are more likely to loosen up in our efforts and be less afraid to make mistakes. Once we are less afraid to make mistakes, we open up the environment for play and experimentation. Intelligence is dynamic and interactive. Original ideas emerge from the interaction of different disciplinary and perceptual ways of seeing things. To enhance this, we can encourage cross disciplinary connections, acknowledge contextual factors and alternative viewpoints, and facilitate collaborative projects and group discussions. Intelligence is also distinct and diverse. We think in all the ways we experience the world, including visually through sight, audibly through sound, kinesthetically through touch, abstractly through concepts, and kinetically through movement. Divergent thinking assignments need to consider how a learner can use different ways to approach a problem. It requires using association and multiplicity of thought. Encouraging divergent thinking could be as simple as restructuring discussion questions or problem statements in open ended and speculative ways, such as what if we looked at it from another perspective? What if we were blank stakeholder? What if the opposite happened? What if we switched A with B, or X with Y, or this with that? It could also be in topic analysis. How would you describe blank? What are the causes and effects of this other thing? What is important about that? How has blank changed? Why are those changes important? What is known and unknown about this topic? We can also guide peer questioning with prompts such as, what are the implications of blank? Why is that important? What is another way to look at the problem or the solution? And for inquiry-based feedback, I noticed that blank happened. Why and how? Many of the strategies that we've talked about previously are also relevant to divergent thinking. Ideation is a general term that includes both idea generation and idea development. Creative ideas do not come in isolation. They come from and while generating work. By going through the process of writing, making, etc., future work and ideas are informed. Some general ways for more effective ideation are to change your media. If you or your students typically work visually, try working verbally or vice versa. Change the constraints or criteria of the challenge or issue at hand, which encourages both flexible and adaptive thinking. Work in unknowns, take risks, and build in translation and abstraction, which can help move from imitating to referencing. Mind or concept mapping, which we've talked about previously, involves putting brainstormed ideas in the form of a visual map or picture that then shows the relationship among these ideas. One starts with a central topic and then draws branches off of that main idea, which represent different parts or aspects of the main topic. Note, this includes both divergent, coming up with all of the elements, and convergent thinking, organizing and evaluating the elements in relationship to one another, so it's a particularly excellent strategy. When free writing, a person will focus on one particular topic and write nonstop about it for a short period of time. The idea is to write down whatever comes to mind about the topic without stopping to proofread or revise the writing. This can help generate a variety of thoughts about a topic in a short period of time, which can later be restructured or organized following some pattern of arrangement. Similarly, journals are also an effective way to record ideas and one things of spontaneously. By carrying a journal, students can create a collection of thoughts on various subjects that later become a source book of ideas. People often have insights at unusual times and places, and so by keeping the journal, students can capture these ideas and use them later when developing and organizing materials in the pre-writing stage. Brainstorming is probably one of the most well-known strategies for divergent thinking, primarily because it involves generating a list of unstructured ideas. In brainstorming, you generate as many ideas as possible in a short period of time. You can piggyback using one idea to stimulate others. But all ideas are recorded, and no idea is disregarded or kept off the table in the initial stages. After these long list of ideas is generated, one can go back and review them to critique their value or merit individually and collectively. It might seem unlikely that debate could be an effective divergent thinking strategy, as we think about it mostly as a way to defend our ideas. But there are some interesting research that shows the effectiveness of it for encouraging more prolonged divergent thinking. In 2003, Charlene Nemeth, a professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley, divided 265 female undergraduates in teams of 5. She gave all the teams the same problem: how can traffic congestion be reduced in the San Francisco Bay Area? And assigned each team one of 3 conditions. The first set of teams got the standard brainstorming spiel, including the no criticism ground rules. Other teams assigned what Nemeth called the debate condition, and were told most research and advice suggests that the best way to come up with good solutions is to come up with many solutions. Freewheeling is welcome. Don't be afraid to say anything that comes to mind. However, in addition, most studies suggest that you should debate and even criticize each other's ideas. The rest received no further instructions, leaving them free to collaborate however they wanted. All the teams had 20 minutes to come up with as many good solutions as possible. The results were telling. The brainstorming group slightly outperformed the groups given no instructions, but teams given the debate condition were the most creative by far. On average, they generated nearly 20% more ideas. And after the teams disbanded, another interesting result became apparent. Researchers asked each subject individually if she had any more ideas about traffic. The brainstormers and the people giving no guidelines produced an average of 3 additional ideas. The debaters produced 7. A complementary and connected strategy to divergent thinking is called lateral thinking. A term coined by Edward de Bono, lateral thinking describes problem solving through an indirect and iterative approach. The main goals of lateral thinking are to force new associations, to think about a concept or problem from a new angle, to rethink a problem that we assume we understand, and to question assumptions and biases. Some of the tools of lateral thinking proposed by de Bono and others include forced association, which uses either random association, such as picking a random entry from the dictionary, or intentional analogy. Think of a problem in terms of something else. Provocation includes exaggeration, wishful thinking, opposite perspective, and distortion. The concept fan, which takes one idea and, similar to a concept map, continues to build on it again and again. And anti-solutions, which challenge conventional thinking and spark debate by starting with an action that would make the situation work and work backwards from that. Forced association, or thinking about one thing in terms of another, uses analogy as a key concept. For example, in a business entrepreneurship class working on a business plan, we could ask the question, how could a company work more like a beehive? Could each employee move around the office and fill different roles? Could employees spend more time in the field and produce only what they need? Could managers step in only at critical times and, with clearly defined tasks and goals, let workers operate independently to fulfill them? This can be a great exercise for in-class activities and loosening up when the stakes are lower. Depending on the situation, you could randomly assign the connection or curate those to intentionally get students to think about a problem, method, issue, etc. in terms of something that on its surface seems disconnected. The goal of provocation is to look at a problem or idea from another perspective. In a recreation and tourism class tasked with making a plan for a new park system, we might identify dog owners as a key stakeholder. But by asking the question, what would this park be like from the dog's point of view, we might start to think about the scale, design, and placement of the park quite differently. In concept fanning, you break up the problem starting from a broad definition of it, and then break it into subproblems and generate discrete solutions to each smaller solvable problem. Concept fans, by their very nature, can be almost infinite and a great way to get students to think much more specifically, in depth, about a problem or solution, while also encouraging them to come up with a lot of different components to it. And finally, anti-solutions can be a great lateral thinking strategy to get students to think creatively by thinking first about how the problem could be worse. For example, students discussing strategies for how to alleviate the growing traffic associated with a rapidly developing urban environment like Raleigh might first start with the prompt, what would make traffic worse in our city? We all know how to make things worse without even thinking. By first coming up with a list as to how to make the problem even worse, we alleviate some of the pressure that is often associated with idea generation. Taking each anti solution and then determining what the exact opposite would be starts to create a list of solutions. In using this strategy, students identify not only the root of what might be core solutions, but also by being encouraged to take risk, they build ownership in the process and remove groupthink. There have been a lot of strategies presented in this lesson, and this type of approach to course material can seem difficult to incorporate. But divergent thinking can be a really positive way to give agency to students' ideas and thoughts, activate critical and creative thinking, acknowledge a multiplicity of approaches that can be evaluated, and encourage failure as a healthy part of learning and practice.